Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. Hello. Thanks for joining our session this morning. There is so many competing sessions. The program is very rich, very exciting. So as a member, as a presenter, I'm so very happy that AASP put on yet another wonderful conference. This morning in this session, we'll be reflecting on past and current practices in gaining entry. And we'll be looking at barriers and identifying barriers in gaining entry, also talking about contextual and style, personal and professional styles, variables that we bring into gaining entry, and also solutions that we've made. My name is Artur Poczwardowski. I'm from University of Denver, and we have great panelists today with Ken Ravizza, California State University at Fullerton, and Chicago Cubs most recently. Thank you, Ken, for joining this session, inspiring this session, and all the work that you've done over the decades to move our field forward in understanding how we can gain entry in different contexts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark Aoyagi, University of Denver, my colleague and friend. Most recent work and affiliation in terms of his consulting work is Denver Broncos. Thank you for joining our session as well. And I am so happy and inspired to be a middle career professional caught between two individuals that I admire so very much. And as you will be seeing for the next few minutes, and then later on when my part comes, I'll be trying desperately to fit. I will be sharing my gaining entry experiences with US Paralympics. That's my most recent consulting experiences over the past 3 years. Okay. So let's get started. A quick overview of some theoretical points, and I know that Dr. Ravizza will be speaking about his model, so I won't be spending much time here. But if you look at empirical explorations and the 2008 publication that was led by Angie Pfeiffer, and then she had Dan Gold, Keith Henshan, and Ken Ravizza as interviewees, they all continue to identify that it's important to prove ourselves as we go with our work. It's important to, in gaining entry, to educate coaches about sports psychology, and also remembering always about knowing the sport, knowing the context of that sport in order to be effective. Another exploration in 2011, Clay Sherman, my colleague, and myself, we interviewed established consultants, and Ken Ravizza was one of them as well. And what we found out is that there is an element that we can call making contact that encompasses a number of things, and then goodness of fit. And in this looking for fit, the importance was on first session and how it's going to go. Obviously, there is more complex than that. And also how the ability of the consultant to generate interest and motivation on the side of the client in order to gain that entry. There are other aspects of it as well in terms of matching your personal style, interpersonal style, your skill set with particular context. Most recently, at the University of Denver, under directions of Mark Aoyagi, we conducted another study, focus groups, and again, we were so privileged that we had Ken Ravizza as one of the participants. And actually, it did happen on the 25th anniversary of publication of that article in 2013. So now you could easily see how quick the publication process is going in terms of when we get it published. But one thing from that study that probably fits, and maybe our panelists will pick up on that, was that we found one of the higher order themes was modern athlete and modern consultant. And one element that was so very clear in that examination of our data was the need to enhance and amend our face-to-face consultation with teleconsultation, with distance consulting. Even if most of our work is face-to-face, those modalities also have been found very helpful. So as we will be moving on, I already previewed the topics, but then we spoke with the panelists, and we might go into different directions as well and share anecdotes and appropriate stories and facts to make this session enjoyable for you and impactful. And then at the very end, Ken also will take the floor and offer concluding remarks. So Mark and I, we talked about it, and then if you will see a imbalance in the time devoted to speaking, so Ken will get the most, obviously, and then if we get less, that's also discussed. We are very comfortable with that, and we'll be very thrilled to hear more about those things from Ken. So then, without further ado, we ask Ken now to start to talk about his part. And you may feel free to sit here, feel free to come here, it's up to you. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Artur. All right, great. Great to be here. It's really interesting because the way this thing started, Dan Gould, I remember, was the editor of the Sports Psychologist at that time, and he said, Ken, what I'd love to do is have you do a series of things, one on gaining entry, one on assessment, one on program delivery, one on program evaluation. And I said, oh my God, Dan, wow, that'd be an honor. And like most things, I only ended up doing one of the four things. And that was the entry part. And then it was fascinating, about 5 years ago, Arthur contacted me and said, it'd be great to revisit what you came up with entry back in 1988, and this was 5 years ago, so 2010, what's changed? And besides me getting older, how's the field gone? And it's just fascinating to be able to play with these ideas, because when I was looking at this, one of the things I thought about was what's remained the same. And that's what I want to talk about. There's certain things in the entry phase that are the same stuff, okay? It hasn't changed. There are other things that have changed, and that's what I want to throw out to you, and then we can get a sharing of ideas, because it is different. There's no question about it. Okay, so first thing back in the day that I talked about was you got to know your sport. You got to know what you're getting into. Is it a team sport, individual sport? And some sports are confusing, like baseball and softball are both team and individual sports, because you're on a team, but you got to perform alone, okay? Then there's subjective sports like gymnastics, figure skating, and then there's objective sports with time. Those are differences that come into play. Contact, non-contact, aerobic, anaerobic, ball-centered sports, open sports, player-centered sports. And all of those things are going to impact the stressors or pressures that the athlete and performer is dealing with, and it gives us a framework to sort of get into those and know what those are about. So knowing your sport becomes critical. Second, the vocabulary of the sport, using the right terminology. The first time this hit me was in 1984 with the U.S. Olympic field hockey team. I was contacted by their coach. I knew nothing about field hockey. And what I did is I still remember, I'm teaching at Fullerton, Long Beach State, had a field hockey team. I remember going over there, watching, talking to the coaches, getting books, looking at videotapes, trying to learn the sport, definitely. So I knew what I was walking into. Now, there have been other situations, like at one point I was invited by the All Blacks to come down to New Zealand, and Graham Henry, the head coach, I said, hey, I don't have time to learn rugby, and I'm just too busy, but I'd be willing to come, but you got to know I don't know rugby. And he said to me, great, I don't want you to know rugby. Come with a fresh pair of eyes. We need a fresh pair of eyes. And it was great, because I remember the first time I met him and we went to the first game. The All Blacks weren't playing, but one of their professional teams was, and I sat there with him, and he said to me, just tell me what you're seeing, and don't be afraid of asking any stupid questions. So one of the questions I asked him was, you know, the ball was out of bounds, and I would ask him a question like, how does the guy know when it's time to throw the ball in? What's he seeing? And just being able to ask stupid questions is great. Like in baseball, I ask stupid questions like, what does it mean for a pitcher when you put your foot on the rubber and you say you're ready? What's it mean to be ready? And in spring training, we usually spend 45 minutes to an hour talking about pictures of what the hell it means to be ready when you put your foot on the rubber, because it sounds so simple. But one thing I've learned in my years of doing this is the mental game for me, it's very simple, but it's very complex. And a term that in our new book, Tom Hansen and I put together, and Tom came up with it, simplexity. It's simple, but it's complex. Where I see the mental game is, it's muddy as hell in this day and age. And this may not be appropriate to entry, but if there's one thing I could leave you with that I want to make sure I get out, it may not be entry, but it is something when I talk with coaches or teams about getting in, I talk about the mental game like this. Why am I here doing this? Why, if you're the team, why am I here? Well, the mental game is messy. It's not simple. It's not clear, okay? And I describe it like eating a chicken sandwich, okay? And let me explain. Bottom layer of the bun, okay? Bottom layer of the bun is your self-doubt, your fears, where your confidence is at. In the previous panel, it was made real clear. With elite athletes, one thing I know, and once again it comes from Dan Gould, but I've really had it in my face continuously, confidence is fragile. I don't care who the athlete is, whatever level. Confidence is fragile. I just came from Chicago. We've had a great year, and man, we got whooped, okay? Now let's be real clear. It happens. And it's not like, I'm a warrior, I'm gonna dominate today. Bullshit. I mean, come on, let's get real here. Let's have a good shitty day. That's part of it, you know? It ain't about dominating. Now when you're going against the best. Okay, so that bottom layer of the bun is where you're at. The chicken in the sandwich, what that is, that's basically your performance. You got to go out and you got to execute, okay? The cheese is where your body's at. The aches and pains, what's happening where you're at. Coming out of Chicago, we just finished playing 180 games. Well, 176 games. Who the hell feels good? Okay? Now one guy, you're banged up, you're hurting. That's part of the deal, man. It's time to compete. Got to compete. Let's go. It's not about feeling good. It's not about being in the zone. It's not about everything being just right. It's about competing. Okay? And competing is giving 100% of what you got to win the next thing you're doing. And that's what it gets down to. And that's the chicken. And the cheese influences your performance. The tomato is how your practice has been going, how things are working out, and just how your training's going. The lettuce is where your personal life is at. Sometimes it's fresh, organic, romaine lettuce. Sometimes it's shredded lettuce, okay? That's on the sandwich, no question. The dressing, that's where you're playing, what venue you're in. You like it, you don't like it, day game, night game, whatever the situation is. Top part of the bun, that's the other guy across the way who's trying to kick your ass. Okay? There's the sandwich. What holds the sandwich together? Self-knowledge. Boom. There's a toothpick that goes through that sandwich called self-knowledge. When you eat the sandwich, you take the toothpick out, you take a bite of the sandwich, and you get goo dripping down your mouth. And you wipe off the goo, and the damn chicken slides that way, the tomato slides that way, and then what you do is you push that stuff back, and you grab into the next bite. And then it slides that way, and then you push it that way, and you take that, and you get the next bite. That's performance. How do you gain entry? Got to explain, this ain't simple. If I believe I can achieve anything, bullshit. You know? If I just see the cup as half full all the time, I'm going to dominate today. I'm going to dominate. You can repeat it 1,000,000 times. Great. But when it comes time, man, get ready to compete. So selling that in terms of the entry is an important part of the puzzle. Okay, now let me get back to the topic. I had to get that in. All right. Know the vocabulary if you can get it. If you don't know the sport, be honest with the people you're working with. And don't try to fake it. Let them know that you don't know. They'll respect that. Okay? Know the history of the team that you're working with. Okay? In the 80s, I worked with Nebraska football, and Nebraska football at that time was like Alabama today. And we're talking about undefeated season is what it's about. And you get one loss, that's a terrible season. Okay? You got to know what's the tradition of the team that you're going into. Hey, we haven't had a winning season. How do we get to 500? You know, whatever. Know that stuff. I did some stuff with USC football a few years ago. The whole USC, University of Southern California, and the stigma that goes with that. Knowing that culture that you're walking into. Very important. Okay? To gain the entry, you've got to do the preparation yourself. You've got to do the preparation. That hasn't changed. You got to pay your dues. You got to do the work. The other thing I have down here is know the research. And what's beautiful, if you look at our journals and you look at the last 10, 15 years, our research is getting sports specific. It's not generic anymore. It's getting very sports specific. It was like in the late 60s, 70s, and we were looking at the Soviet Union, East Germany, all of their research coming out was sports specific to their specific sports. And now we're doing that. So the research is very relevant today. That's definitely changing. If you get a chance, talk to past athletes and coaches who've been involved with those programs to get a feeling for what that culture's like and what's going on. Okay? Do what you do in that situation, but realize you can't do everything. Know when to make the referral, okay? The entry may be that it's not for me. I've got to bring someone else in. I know for me, I've worked with organizations where we've talked, there's a component that I can't address. Like, I'm not qualified to address the clinical issues. We've got to have resources there to do that. And I'm not qualified to do a lot of psychological testing. It's not my thing. I've got to bring someone in to do that and be real clear with those things, okay? When you're gaining entry, there is going to be a time, and this has not changed in all the years, where you're going to be evaluated, okay? I remember when I first started in 1979 with our baseball program at Cal State Fullerton, baseball coach Augie Garrido. He sat with me for 1 year. We met every other Wednesday in my office, and we sat down for 1 hour, and he asked me questions about sports psych, and I asked him questions about baseball, and he would not let me get near his team, okay? And it wasn't until he checked me out and I knew what I was doing. And I had some of his background and information that helped me. And it was those types of relationships with coaches that helped out so much. Because when you go in and work with a team, that coach is turning his or her team over to you. So the trust and the relationship part of it has to be very, very solid. No question. I remember at one major college football team, the head coach sat down, we chatted, he thought it was great. He was into it. Next thing I had to do was do a half-hour presentation to his coaching staff. Okay, 12 coaches, strengthening, probably 15 coaches in the room, blah, blah, blah. I'm doing the Ken Ravizza song and dance, blah, blah, blah. After a half hour, he asked me to leave the room, talks to the coaches, comes back and said, hey, they like what you have to offer. Now what we need you to do, we're going to bring in a group of seniors, and we're going to have the seniors. And when the seniors came in, the head coach sat on the side. and he was looking at me, and he was looking at the team. And he was doing this before I got in front of the whole team. Why? He's checking it out. He's checking it out. Now, in professional baseball, I think I've shared this story with some of you. When I started with the Angels in 1985, I was invited to spring training. And the entry was real clear. Ken, you're going to come in. You got a half hour. You're going to talk to 30 pitchers. At the end of the half hour, they're going to have a 3x5 index card. Yes, we want the man back. No, get his ass out of here. Okay? Oh, my God, I was a wreck. All right? All right, so that particular day in Mesa, Arizona, it rains. We got to move in back of the facility. We got to move the tractors out. Guys are sitting on line bags. We're in this enclosed area in the back of the locker room, and I'm up there, and I'm talking about the mental game, trying to gain my entry, trying to get in with the Angels, and I'm nervous. My armpits are wet, and I'm talking, and I'm talking. In the middle of my talk, the hot water heater goes off on the showers, and it's just blaring. And I'm talking, and I'm talking. And I finished my damn talking. And the guys came up to me. I can still see the 5 guys that came up, and they said, "You didn't hear that hot water heater." I said, "What hot water heater?" They said, "I can learn something from you." Okay? I didn't hear the hot water heater, not because I was focused. I didn't hear the hot water heater because I was so damn nervous and tense delivering the presentation, but they thought it was focused, so we'll take it, okay? I mean, but it's those little things that they read into, and they pick up on. You know, what can I get out of that? 3 minutes, all right, boom. All right, so what's changed? That stuff's remained the same. All right, what's changed? There's a hell of a lot more acceptance of sports psychology. Thanks to the work of Coleman Griffith, Bruce Ogilvie, Gloria Bellegay, and all the other people that have been doing the work, setting the tone. Major League Baseball has gone from, in the last 5 years, 3 teams with full-time people to 28 teams. With full-time people at major league level, minor league level. We are the flavor of the month, okay? We're the hot item. In baseball, the strength and conditioning is maxed out, the analytics is maxed out, and right now the next edge is the sports psych, part of the puzzle. But the issue is we can't drop the ball. We got to deliver. We got to deliver. We can't blow this, okay? So that's very important. And it's due to the contributions like with Theo Epstein, the general manager of the Cubs. I shared with him Coleman Griffith's notes that Dan Gould got to me with Theo Epstein. And Theo said he could not believe that in 1938, the Cubs had someone in doing sports psych, and it was not well received. Okay? But the pioneers in our field. Collaboration. Next big thing that's changed. Next big thing that's changed is you're not just going in the old days, 88, I just had to convince a coach. Now you're dealing with strength and conditioning people, athletic training people, the sports medicine team with these organizations, assistant coaches, management. It's a whole different dynamic that you've got to be fitting into and where your place is with it. The next thing I think that's changed is we really have to put the mental skills, the sports psych skills into task-relevant performance keys that the athletes can use on a daily basis in their training, okay? It's no longer we're going to meet Wednesday from 12 to 1 and do sports psych. It's got to be something that's integrated into the system with the head, and this is the way my work breaks down with the Cubs. 1/3 of my work is with Joe Madden, the manager. 1/3 of my work is with the coaching staff, and 1/3 of my work is with the players, okay? Because if the coaches are reinforcing it to the players, that helps so damn much. Okay, what else do I have? Boom. The other thing that's changed dramatically, cell phones and the technology. Before a game, man, you want to know what everyone's doing right before the game? You want to know what everyone's doing right after the game? Just like all of us. It's where we are as a culture. That comes into play. That comes into play. With players I work with, some of them, I can send a message with a text before a game, and I'm sitting at the other side of the clubhouse, and I can send a reminder of 1 pitch at a time, buddy. Shit, man, I'm texting the guy across the room. And some players can't handle face-to-face. Some players handle this. I don't agree with it. It's crazy, but that's the world we're in. Some final things. Boom. Coaches want sports psych. It came up in the last panel, but they don't know what the hell they want. You got to give them a menu. Yeah, we want sports psych. We want to be doing what they're doing, but what the hell is it? We're still at that phase in this day and age. I think the other big thing is mental toughness. That's what I'm hearing a lot about. Another one, how to compete. How to compete. Crazy that we got to talk about how to compete. That's where I'm at right now. How do you compete? Because kids today don't compete. In Major League Baseball, minor league baseball, we're a blue-collar team. A kid growing up in America playing college, high school baseball, college baseball, none of them have ever worked in their life. And we're a blue-collar team. Bullshit. They've never had a job. That's what we're dealing with. I mean, it's different, no question. And then being on a team, because it's not being on a team, it's me. And now we got to be on a team. So I went over, I'm sorry. But that's a start. Boom. Take it back.
All right, so being on a panel with Ken and Artur, you're very aware of your limitations. So one of the, I'm going to try and share a story here, and one of the kind of meta themes is about knowing yourself. So I'm aware that I'm trying to share a story when I'm not a storyteller, and I'm following kind of a master at that. And I'm up here next to Artur, who many of you may not know this, but when you do a search on PsycInfo or Sport Discus, that actually goes to Artur, and he answers. So you have to know who you are and know what you bring to the table. And when you're sitting at a table with these two, you're aware that sometimes it's not a lot. So what I'm going to share is kind of how I started working in professional sport, and hopefully within that you'll hear some embedded themes, and I'll come back to that again at the end as well. So it was about a year or two after I arrived in Denver, I got a call from Jerry Butler, who was the director of player development for the Denver Broncos at the time. And he was looking for people to work in their rookie success program. So this was I think it's a 10-module program that the NFL had mandated that all rookies have to go through. And it's really, I say that it's not a prestigious thing. It's something that Jerry was just kind of trying to check the boxes and get people to present. And he had just come into town within 2 weeks of when he made this phone call. So he's behind. This is right at the start of the season. He's behind. And so all this is to set the stage for, I'm just some guy that can maybe do something for him. So I arrived not knowing any of that, of course. I found all that out later. And so Jerry and I are chatting, and he's sort of feeling me out. Obviously, sort of these high-profile opportunities, there's a lot of people that are approaching them and trying to sell them certain things and whatnot. And so he was really just trying to screen for, if when I got in front of the rookies, I was going to, try and get my picture taken with Von Miller or something like that. And within about 5 minutes of sitting down, the conversation had shifted away from the rookie symposium, and we were talking about, Jerry was a former player, and he was really interested in injury and how to help players when they were injured and coming back from injury and so forth. And we sort of just started talking about that, and he just started asking my ideas on that. And as I reflect on this years later, I think what happened was I went into the meeting not really having any expectations, not really knowing a whole lot about any of the things that I just shared, and really just looking to meet Jerry Butler and form a connection and build a relationship. And as a result of that, I think Jerry became comfortable with the idea that I wasn't there, trying to sell something. I wasn't there trying to get something necessarily. I was a person that maybe had a skill set that they might be able to take advantage of. So I ended up doing the Rookie Success Program, or a couple of modules within the Rookie Success Program, I should say. And then Jerry kind of built this. The first year we did an injury group, and I guess you would say fortunately for me, not so great for the team. It was like 13 players on IR that year. They had a really tough year with injuries. And again, one of these fortunate circumstances was that one of those players that got hurt early on, actually walking out the tunnel for the first game, was a veteran player. And this was, in general, a pretty young team. And so this veteran player had suffered ended up being a career-ending injury. At the time, it was a season-ending injury. And in our meetings with the players, it was Jerry, the director of player development, myself, sometimes an athletic trainer, not usually, sometimes a strength coach, not usually, and then the team chaplain. Those were really the regular staff members, and then whatever players that were on IR at the time or injured at the time. And as a result of these conversations, I was able to build a relationship with a veteran, and I think he kind of really opened the door and made it okay for some of the younger guys to engage in those conversations and seek that out. So anyways, that was kind of the scenario with the Broncos for about 2 or 3 years. Along that time, so Jerry had introduced me to Steve Antonopoulos. He's largely known as Greek for obvious reasons. And he was the head athletic trainer, and he's really a cornerstone of the organization. He's been there, I think, 41 years. This is his 41st year now. So he would also refer players to me throughout the course of the year and at different time points, just whenever he thought somebody needed it or they asked him about the service. So that was kind of the situation with the Broncos for 2 or 3 years. I forget exactly how long. And then in the spring of one of these years, the head athletic trainer from the Denver Nuggets called and asked if I would work with one of their players, said they were looking for somebody. And then, so I worked with that player through the end of the season. And then in the course of that relationship, the trainer said, hey, we've always been interested in having somebody come work with the team. Can we talk about that after the season ends? So this season, the Nuggets went in the playoffs as kind of they weren't the team to beat in terms of being the top seed, but they were the hottest team going in the playoffs. Nobody wanted to match up with them. I think they were 20-3 down the stretch or something like that. But part of that down the stretch was one of their key players suffered a season-ending injury. So point of the story is that they go out in the first round. They had the coach of the year and the executive of the year, and they let both of them go. And so I'm like, well, probably that opportunity went by the wayside. But a month or so later, after the season ends, the trainer reaches out, and he's like, hey, let's grab lunch. So we go to lunch, and we're just, again, kind of talking about what would this look like, what could you do, and so forth. And so at the end, we've had a good conversation. I say, so, I imagine you'll wait and see who comes in as the GM and the coach, and then maybe we'll talk some more. And he's like, no, this is perfect. I'll hire you out of my budget, and then when we have a GM and a coach, they'll just think you're part of the team. And that was actually exactly how it ended up working out. Again, this athletic trainer he was actually the senior member of the organization. The team at that time, the owner, I had TA'd the owner at the University of Missouri. He was 29 years old at the time, I think. He actually wasn't the owner, he was the governor, because his dad was the owner and owned another professional team, so so that was the governor. The GM that they hired was a first-time GM. He was 34 years old, I believe, at the time. And the head coach was about 40 years old, but first-time head coach. It was a very young organization. But this athletic trainer, again, had been there 30-plus years at the time, but the longest tenured member of the organization by far. So he had quite a bit of power. And again, this is all stuff I didn't know until further on down the road. But what the key thing here is that the Nuggets head athletic trainer and the Broncos head athletic trainer were best friends. And so come to find out, that's how the whole thing happened, is that Jim was the Nuggets guy, had called Steve, the Broncos guy, and said, hey, do you guys have anybody? And that's how my name got to him. So worked with the Nuggets for about 1.5 years, 2 years, and then after that, then the Broncos wanted to hire somebody. Now Steve knew who I was, and so he brought me back in there. So, as I was reflecting on this, I'm like, well, that's a pretty odd set of circumstances. What's anybody going to take away from that? But I think the takeaway is, number one, at least at the professional level, usually it is odd circumstances. If you hear of how people get involved, it usually is there's not a straight path to it. So the points that maybe you heard in the subtext of that story, the first is to be prepared. And be prepared for what? Who knows, right? So be prepared with everything that you can be prepared with. The most important step with that, I think, is surrounding yourself with really smart people and really good people, better than you, which for me just means people. But making sure that you surround yourself with a great support squad, and people like Ken, Artur, Rick McGuire, Keith Henshin, Gloria Balagay, several people in this room have really allowed me to be, they've taken, they've taken not much and maybe made it into a little bit of something. The second piece is building relationships and focusing on, again, not what you can get from people, but really just being a people person. I think it's pretty hard to be successful doing what we're doing without being a people person. And many of you that know me, I'm not the most extroverted person in the world, so I wouldn't call myself a people person by any means, but I'm interested in people. And so again, it's knowing yourself and figuring out how to get the most out of you and what you bring to the table and making that work for you. That being said, it's about them, it's not about you. I think if I had gone into any of those conversations that I talked about with a focus on what I could get out of it or even what I had to offer, I don't think they would have turned out the same way. I think it was really my curiosity and wanting to understand the situation that allowed for it to evolve in a way that ended up, that maybe I was the answer to the question. So listen a lot. I like Stephen Covey's 7 Habits. Those are probably really old now, and many of you don't even know what I'm talking about, most likely. But habit 5 of his is seek first to understand, and I think that's really, really key, obviously in what we do as professionals, but also in this gaining entry piece. And the last thing is you never know who's going to open the door for you. And so the last piece of the story that I'll share is that how Jerry Butler got my name and contact information initially was he called the NFL office, and someone in the NFL office, he never remembered who, and I have no clue who in the NFL office would have known who I was. But someone in the NFL office gave him my contact info, and that's how all this started, from someone that I don't even know who it is to this day. And, they probably had somebody else's contact info and mistook me for that person, and that's how it all happened. But the point is, you never know who's going to open that door. So really focus on building relationships, being interested in people, and I think good things will happen. Thanks.
Thank you. So I'm thinking that I'm going to add a piece to this mass substance of people and relationships, and sometimes we know and sometimes we might not know. I think I know most of that story I'm going to tell you, and it's about me getting into US Paralympics work. So we have Paralympic director who is looking for sport and performance psychologists to help with para teams. So rightly so, he is going to senior sports psychologists at USOC, Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs, and he speaks to Sean, he speaks to Peter Harbel, Sean McCain, and then he speaks to Alex Cohen, and they have full plates. But they also know Denver, and they know Mark, they know me, they know Jamie, and they point the director eyes to the University of Denver. So he emails us, we get on the phone, we get to a coffee shop, we talk, the performance director on the para end. He likes that, he goes back to his office, calls a coach of one para team, gives that person's our emails and phones, that person gets in touch with me and with Jamie. And that's the contact that Jamie Shapiro and we co-consult with a couple of teams, and I'm going to tell a story of which I was a sole consultant. So then we talk, I talk with the coach, and they like the idea, so we are going to meet. And that's already passed from mid-May to mid-October. I'm at the conference here. I speak to Tracy Statter because she's done work with Paralympians. She supports me. She gives me ideas. I desperately think about this credibility piece that Ken talked about. You need to be credible. You need to be respectful. You need to gain trust. You need to know the sport, specifics of it. You know the politics of all of that. Otherwise, the gaining entry becomes much more difficult. I speak to Alex Cohen, and Alex Cohen picks up a phone and called the head coach of that para team, and the next day he says, yes, I talked to him, you know, I put a word for you. So now I have a whole village of individuals that actually helped me to gain that entry, that first formal entry, that's external credibility, word of mouth. Now, in order to be flexible, be able to go on the road, be on for racing, be at camps, we need to have flexible schedule. So then Mark tells me, don't worry about it. We'll put the teaching between Tuesday and Thursday, so if you can go for long weekends, and then if you can handle it, that's going to be fine. So I have another element, another piece of the puzzle that allows a more affordable entry. So then I go to headquarters in Colorado Springs. I am interviewed by the head coach, by the high performance director, by the manager of that team. So then there is a looking entry at that level. That goes well. I'm getting invitation to go and be at that camp, at their camp. I go and join them in Utah for 5 days, and I do virtually nothing for 5 days. I hang out and I build rapport. I smile a lot, and I try to polish my accent so people understand me. I help the nutritionists. I cook dinners with them. I feed the athletes. I help them around as they move to practice venues and so on. And then on day 4, the head coach tells me, you know what, tomorrow we have 30 minutes between the practice and the dinner. Why don't you take it, and why don't you speak to athletes? So I took that opportunity, and that was the first time I spoke to the athletes as a group. Then what happens next is the sandwich hybrid approach. 2 camps, they go to New Zealand, they go to Sweden. I get to connect with them via Skype, group, and also individuals. And then there comes next time to do a camp in Olympic Training Center. And then the coach tells me about his wonderful workshop that he went to, and there was Sean McCann from the Olympic Training Center, and he talked about biathlon, he talked about shooting, he talked about the mental game. That would be really cool if some of that content will be brought into our team as well. So I pick up the phone, and Sean picks up his phone, and so we talk. He is in between things, there's lots of things going on, and yet another person in the village grants me his time, his expertise, so we collectively can get entry to that team. And then from that point on, things started to really move forward very nicely with that hybrid approach I mentioned, in person and lots of teleconsultation. So I learned how to use Voxer and how to use Vox messaging. One thing is to write an email, another thing is to send a voice message to an athlete. And you can attach emails, and you can do Skype, FaceTimes, you can text them across the room, across the ocean. This really is very helpful modality to connect, stay in touch. So one couple of things I thought that I would like to leave you with, and then turn it to Ken for his concluding remarks, and then question and answers is this. Gaining entry is an ongoing piece. So it's a long-term gain entry, takes a village, and then you have that first impression, first workshop, first conversation that you look for teachable moments, for psychological entry. It might happen, it might not. So with help of coaches, with the continued support from everyone else, that actually happened in my case, that entry was granted. So here is, I'm offering another switch. From gaining entry, yes, that's all our effort, but the entry actually is granted. So it takes 2 to actually form a platform from which the collaboration can be accomplished. So with those 3 magic words of gain respect, be credible, and then gain trust, I started to do things. And being respectful, caring, and being resourceful to match those 3 things as key components of gaining entry. And I also discovered there is a sequence to it as well. From introductions, you've heard about that, to formal entry. When you formally invited, you formally become part of the environment. To informal entry, Then you start to do things with individuals, with coaching staffs and so on, and with the athletes. Then is the psychological entry, if the teachable moment presents itself, if we can make a difference in brief moment or a bigger interaction. And then we have onset of the relationship or working alliance that needs to be continually maintained. And it's a cyclical piece. With every season in those 4-year quad, with every beginning of the season, you recycle gaining entry. It's easier. You have some rapport, you have relationship, you have your moves, you have some trust, so it's easier, but you recycle that. There is a summer break in some teams, then you need to cycle it back and regain that entry again. So building relationship that becomes later on the platform for it. So I think that this is what I would like to contribute to this session. There is a lot of things that I'm learning. I have learned from readings on gaining entry, from the focus groups, from discussions, conversations, and also with that I'd like to thank all you, those individuals who be part of that village that sometimes with complex organizations gaining entry is only possible through that collective effort. Thank you. So, if you can now would like to add a couple of items wrapping up, that's great, could be good time, or we can take questions and then I'll be moderating the part. Thank you.
I sat there and listened, and a couple of things I want to just throw out. And Mark brought it up with the gentleman who was there for the 30 years with the club. One thing I would say to all of us, when you get into a team, the athletic trainers are a very critical piece of the puzzle. They are a caregiver. They're the gatekeeper. They take care of the team. Your strength and conditioning person in this day and age is another one. Those are two key people that you've got to make sure that you're understanding and you're not getting into their territory if you want to, 1, gain entry, and 2, stay there. So just a heads up there, I thought that was a great part. The part you brought up, Mark, with the injury group, those are a bunch of people that are sort of pushed aside and no one has time for, and you can build really nice relationships with those athletes and they can really see that you care. No question there. The other thing that I brought up is, and I'm sure some of you are sitting there, this is gaining entry. How do I get my business going? How do I get this thing started? Couple things. For me, I had the luxury of being at a university, being a professor, being with coaches in the same building. There were interactions, things evolved. A lot of you may not have that access. That's not your path. Your path is going to be your path. You may have a friend that coaches, and not that you're going to go in and help him or her with sports psych, but just go in, observe, learn from them, and just take it in and be in that environment. For my graduate students, I would always say to them, hey, if you can't work with a team, then coach a youth sport team and work the mental game stuff into those kids that you're working with so you get good at doing your work, because there's going to come the time you're going to have to produce, okay? Now, you may have a player you worked with in college and he signs a Major League Baseball or a contract with pro baseball. That player is not going to get you into the organization. Let's drop that. It ain't going to happen, okay? So let's be real clear there. And you're going to have to get in that organization through the work that you do, and people hear about it. And one thing that has changed for me dramatically is I get a lot of young people in the field, and I know I'm going to irritate some people right now, but I'm going to say it. And they sit down, and what they want to know is, how much do I make a day? How about if you talk to me about how do you use a routine when a guy's struggling with his C game versus when he has his A game? I love those questions. The question of how much do you make and what do I charge? Shit, man, learn your craft. Learn your work. And that all is going to come. And I hope I didn't perturb too many people, but learn your work. The other thing I want to share is football players, basketball players, and baseball players, it's a privilege for you to have the honor to talk with them. Okay? Let's be real clear. Let's understand the nature of the sports. Okay? If you want to try to charge someone for your services, look at golf, tennis, equestrian, figure skating. Why? They're used to paying for things. Okay? So it's just one thing for the young people in the crowd I'll put out there on a very practical note. Okay? It's just the way it is for me. That's what I've seen. So, some questions?
We'll take your questions, observations, and we'll try to interact with you the best we can now, please.
Hi, that was a lot of great information. And one question I have is, what additional advice do you have for a woman or gaining entry right now, if there's any different advice you have?
For me, I'm looking at Tracy Statler sitting right here. When she came as a graduate student, she sat in my office and said, I want to work with the baseball team, and I laughed at her. And she ended up working with the baseball team, and she ended up doing it. I think there are a lot of advantages of being a female working with some of these teams. No question. Things are definitely changing on that front from my perspective. And some of the speakers that we've had at the conference, the woman influence can be dramatic. Even back in 1985 at Nebraska football, Tom Osborne had a woman who was doing sports psych with the team in '85, and she really connected and resonated with those players. So it's just some, don't let it get in the way, because it's not an obstacle.
Well, I'll say it's probably obvious that there's probably better people to answer this question than me. But having, trained a lot of women graduate students and been around a lot of women professionals that are working in professional sport, in sister professions. I meant sister professions to ours, not that they're only women's professions. This is tricky. So, anyways, point being that, again, I think the important themes are the same: knowing yourself and being able to make you work in that environment. I think some of the pros are it's a very stereotypical environment, meaning that masculinity and so on the one hand, the pro of that is a lot of times they meaning the players will view it as easier to open up to a woman and are more comfortable talking to a woman about some of the things that we might talk about. On the negative side of things, or on the challenge side of things, there's a lot of misogyny. There's a lot of minimizing. I mean, Cam Newton, his press conference a couple weeks ago now. I mean that's an attitude that's there. And, that wasn't unique to Cam by any means. So there's definitely barriers, but there are also some opportunities as well.
I'll add quickly from the same platform that Mark spoke about in terms of our supervisory work at University of Denver and our female students. What is working is the small group supervision and peers who support the person gaining entry and experiencing some of that gender bias against herself. So that's very important. Processing in a small group session, very important. Developing action plans, very important. Knowing that she has her back covered, and then she's protected by the institutional organizational piece of our program and field placement structure. So I'm speaking about it from an educational standpoint, and then it's obviously much more difficult when a person is on her own. So what I would advocate for is to developing a system of peers who can support you. In one instance, we decided collectively that one placement was not optimal for a female consultant, and then we decided to withdraw her. And then, in collaboration with the coach, with the team and organization that we work with, we terminated that placement because there was only one way to protect the well-being of that female consultant and also continue to nurture the relationship with that particular placement.
I've got to just throw in one thing here, whether it's the male-female issue or whether it's age issue, there are advantages and disadvantages of every place we're at. For the young people in the room, your advantage is you're totally connected with this age group athlete. For an old fart like me with the gray hair, balding, stories. We each have our advantages we bring to the table, and just enjoy and do the work from where you're coming from and get into it. Because I'll tell you, I'd take your youth for where I'm at, and you'd probably want some of my stories for where you're at, and we're all going through that, so what the hell, enjoy where you're at.
Next question. Here? Yes. Thanks.
Yeah, I was just wondering your perspective, your opinion, the limitations of some of us that have a lot of experience but don't have the doctorate degree, and what might be the limiting factors in working with, I know there's some of us out there that work in that field, but your opinion on maybe some of the limitations of what that presents in elite sport, professional sport.
I'll give a short answer. In professional sport, they don't care. They have no clue what my qualifications are. It was somebody they trusted gave them my name.
I would agree with Mark. If you can deliver and help them, that's what they're going to be very interested in. That's their concern.
Potentially adding credentials to master's degree, also adding CMPC, maybe LPC, making persons more marketable, more diversifying one's portfolio. That might be also an additional skill set that we would recommend, and that would come from also advising our students in our program. And we've always walked that fine balance of nurturing and supporting those students who would like to pursue the doctoral level, and also empowering and strengthening the faith, hope, and then actual skill sets for individuals who want to practice with master's degree, because you could have very successful paths without regard of what your terminal degree is.
And just to follow up, so I know that there's some programs, it seems like you've avoided that very effectively, the idea of separating clinical from sport psychology. So I know there's some programs where they want to try to do both with one person, and it seems like, if I'm hearing it correctly, that you disagree with that approach, if I'm right.
With which approach, if you could?
So clinical work versus applied sports psychology work.
In our program, we integrate these two, mental health with performance enhancement. We are privileged to have a composition of faculty that have both licensure and then background in sport and exercise science. We have field placements on performance, and we have collaborations and ties with field placements on the mental health clinical end. And then our students choose them on their own, whether they will be pursuing exclusively applied path or both applied and clinical. And I hope that with my response that didn't sound clear, wouldn't add to the false dichotomy of behavioral labels of performance versus clinical and others, because they are present, and we know that from our colleagues from USOC, that everything is about performance, whether it's a joy of being newlywed or having some depressive moods because in reaction to something that really happened, tragic happened, trauma that happened in a person's life.
Hello. So in working with the military, oftentimes I find myself in a situation where the actual soldiers I'm working with were not the ones in the decision process to actually have that training take place. So Artur, using your terminology, essentially I've gained more entry than those I'm working with have granted, whether it's because a commander decided that, hey, these guys are going to now do some cognitive training, so they're there, whether they like to be or not. Have you ever been in that situation where, again, like you've gained more entry than you've been granted, and what are some strategies or tips you guys have for navigating that situation?
I've had it more often on individual settings than group settings. So, the group setting is a whole host of challenges. In general, to me, it comes back to the relationship. That when a person doesn't want to be there or a group of people don't want to be there, I'm focused on building a relationship with them, and I'm not going to force that relationship to be around sports psychology. You don't want to talk about sports psychology? Cool. Tell me about, what it was like for you growing up, or whatever. Tell me why you don't want to be here. Tell me what else you'd rather be doing right now. Just something to kind of break the ice and start a conversation, and then, usually when you're as boring as me, inevitably it's going to turn to, well, don't you have something interesting to say? And I'll say, well, here's the only interesting thing I know about, and, you find a window, but it all comes down to the connection first and the relationship.
For me, I find my batting average is generally 1/3 are into it, 1/3 are sitting on the fence, and 1/3 isn't going to have much to do with it. But what's amazing is you will get people in the groups that you're talking with that you may think are not listening and hearing you, but they're hearing every word you say. That surprises the heck out of me. Because sometimes in the culture that they're in, they can't let on. This is really going back in the earlier years where they couldn't let on, I'm into this. Where today there's more acceptance. But you're not going to get everybody.
I appreciate your question, hopefully, and I'm sure that was very helpful, and we'll go to other people who would like to ask questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's go on my left side. Thank you.
Okay, hello. First of all, thank you for your comment on the cyclical aspect of gaining entry. For someone who's just starting out with consulting, I think that's something that hit me hard, and I want to keep that in mind. My question is about, so I'm from Denmark, being international, I hope to go back to Denmark, back to Europe to consult one day, and I wonder if there's anything to be said about gaining entry internationally. I'm sure you've worked many places in the world, and are there any differences, anything to be learned from that?
Maybe quickly, one of the most recent referrals that I received, that is back in the country of my origin, was through one of my students. So I know that this is completely not in the realm of the questions you asked, but I would like to add that is sometimes things happen because of serendipities that we are not aware of. If going back to your country and making publications, make social and professional networking, that will be starting your business there like anyone would need to start a business in their own country. What I think that was helping me in general was that people in our country knew that I received my degree in the United States, and that opens a lot of doors. So in this sense, that could be actually that one element could be so helpful in gaining formal entry.
I think it's back to understanding as best you can the culture that you're going into. And like what I was talking about is understanding the subculture of the different sports. The soccer is different than golf, okay? But then when you're going internationally, I just think of some of the presentations we've had at AASP by the group from Norway, and just some of the PowerPoints of just the way they work the emotion, the visual into it. I mean, I've always been impressed when I come here, seeing the way different presenters from different countries capture it, and just trying to be sensitive to those things when you go in.
Thank you. Last question, Dr. Patipa, please go ahead. Yes.
I'm honored because this is the first time I've ever asked a question at one of these, so this is exciting.
So we were the least clear presentation you've ever been to? Is that what I'm hearing?
That's true. What happens when you get the call, you have the informal working agreement with the person who gives you the call, and then you find out that the real power or the gatekeeper has a different agenda? Just one at a time.
Run.
Sorry.
I haven't been privileged to be in that situation, so I don't have much to add.
You get blindsided, you know, and then you got to figure out those dynamics out in terms of, and it happens all the time. In the baseball world, you'll get it from a player's agent may refer the player to you, and management wants to be involved, and then you get caught up in the middle of it. And sometimes it's all kept quiet, where the agent's player, they don't want the team to know anything about it, and there's all these different dynamics that you're working through. But it does get down to that you've got to build the relationship with the person you're working with. I mean, it gets back to that, no question.
I'll just say quickly, I think, you know, you started the scenario from when that situation has happened, and I think the way that I try and approach it now is to do my homework as much as possible so that situation doesn't occur. So when I'm exploring a new opportunity, I do a needs analysis, and again, it's what they want, right? And so I try and structure the relationship around answering the questions that they have, as opposed to selling the products that I have or the skills that I have. Now, that doesn't get around the fact that sometimes there's different agendas within the organization, and you know, I don't have a good answer for that, obviously, beyond, you know, just trying to build relationships and hopefully finding where, you know, I'll say this, I think one of the most valuable skill sets we have is in group facilitation. You know, I don't know of any of our professional and the related professions that we work with, strength and conditioning and athletic training and coaches and all these. None of them that I'm aware of get direct training in group facilitation. And actually, Al was just having a conversation with me before this meeting about the role that he played in facilitating a group that was dysfunctional. And I think that's a really valuable skill that we can bring to the table, not to try and resolve it necessarily, but just to demonstrate and teach the skills to have productive conversations when there's different agendas going on. Did I sidestep your question pretty well?
Thanks everyone for staying over time. We appreciate your questions and insights. Thank you our panelists as well. Have a good afternoon.